They told me not to come. Stay away from Dad's birthday. You'll ruin everything. But as I walked into that golden-lit ballroom, every smile froze, except his. My father's eyes sliced through me like I was an intruder, not his daughter. For years, I believed I was invisible, a shadow erased from photographs, from memories, from love. Yet when his most powerful investor locked eyes with me, the air cracked. "Ms. Hayes, you're Richard's daughter?" In that instant, the room collapsed into silence, and I realized the secret they had buried was about to bury them. I grew up in a house where perfection was carefully staged, like a photograph you were never allowed to touch. The Hayes family portrait was framed in gold, hung above the fireplace, polished so often the glass gleamed like a mirror. My father, Richard Hayes, was always in the center of that picture. Broad smile, perfect tie, the aura of a man who had built an empire with his bare hands. Beside him, my mother Vivian glowed like the woman who had it all, her pearls shining brighter than the chandelier. And of course, there was Lucas, my older brother, his arm slung over Richard's shoulder as if the throne already belonged to him. I was in the photo too, tucked to the side, but no one ever looked at me. I was the blur in the background, the extra no one bothered to retouch. At dinner, the table stretched longer than necessary, a stage set for Richard's booming voice and Lucas's victories. "Another internship offer from the firm," Lucas said, and the table broke into applause. Vivian's hand touched his, her smile soft with pride. Richard lifted his glass. "That's my boy." I chewed my food quietly, unnoticed. They spoke of law schools, investment deals, vacations Lucas might take. I wasn't asked about my job, my art classes, or the manuscript that sat unfinished in my drawer. My fork scraped the porcelain plate, a sound sharp enough to remind me I was still there. But no one flinched. Maybe, I thought, if I disappeared this second, would anyone notice? My eyes moved from face to face. Richard's gaze never left Lucas. Vivian leaned toward him, laughing at some half-clever remark. Lucas smirked, basking in the glow of their approval. I whispered the question inside my own head, like a secret prayer. If I vanished, would any of them even care? Later that evening, as I passed the library, I heard my mother's voice, low and deliberate. "Richard, the party is only for family. Don't let her show up and ruin it." Her words struck harder than I expected. I froze in the hallway, my breath shallow. Only for family. As if I weren't blood, as if my presence was an offense. Richard's response was muffled, but his silence said enough. By the time I reached my room, my phone buzzed. "Lucas." I hesitated, then answered. His voice was clipped, almost rehearsed. "Don't come to Dad's birthday. You'll ruin everything." I swallowed hard. Why would I ruin anything? "Because you always do." His tone was final. The line went dead before I could reply. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the phone in my hand, the echo of his words vibrating through me. My brother, the golden child, the pride of the Hayes family, had spoken with the authority of a guard at the gate, and my sentence was banishment. For a moment, I wondered if I was overreacting. Maybe it was just a misunderstanding. Maybe Lucas was being dramatic or Vivian was simply stressed. But deep down, I knew better. This wasn't new. This was the pattern. For years, they had been pushing me further to the edge of the photograph until I was nearly cropped out entirely. The next morning, I passed Richard in the hallway. He was adjusting his cufflinks, preparing for a meeting, exuding control as always. As he slipped his jacket on, a small white card fell from his inner pocket. I bent to pick it up. It was an invitation. Heavy cardstock embossed with gold lettering. "You are cordially invited to celebrate Richard Hayes' 60th birthday." I searched for my name. Clara Hayes. It wasn't there. The list of family members printed beneath was short. Vivian Hayes. Lucas Hayes. I stared at it for a long time, the words blurring as heat rose in my chest. My name had been erased, not forgotten, intentionally left out. It was the proof of everything I had feared. They didn't consider me family anymore. My fingers trembled as I slipped the card back into Richard's pocket before he noticed. He didn't even glance my way, too busy checking his reflection in the mirror. "Be ready for tonight's dinner," he said absently. "It's important for Lucas." He didn't look at me when he spoke. It was as if he were addressing the air. I nodded, though he couldn't see. Inside, something cracked. The illusion of belonging, the fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, I was still part of them, shattered in that single omission. That night, as I lay awake, the thought wouldn't leave me. If my name can be erased from a card, how long before I'm erased from their lives entirely? The next morning, I walked into the living room and froze. A new photo album hung in a sleek black frame above the mantel, replacing the old golden portrait. It was modern, stylish, and curated with precision. My mother must have had it done. She loved to reinvent the house with new art. I moved closer, studying the glossy images arranged in neat rows. Richard in a tailored suit, Vivian radiant in a sapphire gown, Lucas with his effortless smile. Family trips, holiday dinners, birthdays. But not a single picture of me. Not one. I scanned it twice, then 3 times, searching desperately for even a blurred outline of my face in the background. Nothing. I had been edited out, as though I had never existed. Vivian's heels clicked against the marble floor behind me. "Lovely, isn't it?" she said, her voice smooth as silk. "Where am I?" The question escaped before I could stop myself. She glanced at the frame, tilting her head. "Oh, Clara, the album looks cleaner this way. More cohesive. Pictures without you just look better." Her words struck me like a slap. "Cleaner?" I whispered. "Yes," she said, already turning away, dismissing me as if she were talking about an outdated piece of furniture. "It's nothing personal. Aesthetics matter." I stood there, staring at the glossy smiles on the wall. Did they truly want me gone? Was I just clutter, an untidy detail they could erase for the sake of appearances? That evening, I sat at the dining table with my laptop, trying to focus on work, but my mind replayed her words again and again until my chest felt hollow. I reached for water, and as the screen lit up with a notification, I caught sight of something unusual. An email sat open in the inbox, left behind from when Richard had used my laptop earlier that day. The subject line made my pulse quicken. "Contract confirmation. Clara Hayes." I clicked before fear could stop me. My eyes raced across the lines. Agreement signed under the authority of Clara Hayes, beneficiary of account. The documents were signed with my name, my identity, yet I had never touched them. I felt my throat tighten. My father had been signing contracts under my name. Why? Before I could read further, footsteps approached. I slammed the laptop shut, heart hammering. I slipped it into my bag, forcing a neutral expression as Richard passed through the room. He didn't notice my panic. He was on the phone, laughing with someone about profits and meetings. But inside, something dark coiled in my chest. Why is my name on his business deals? Days later, the tension cracked open wider. Lucas had been managing one of Richard's smaller projects, something meant to prove his readiness for bigger responsibilities. It failed. A shipment was delayed, investors threatened to pull out, and chaos rippled through the office. I wasn't there when it happened, but I heard Richard's roar through the walls. "This is Clara's fault! Every mistake in this family can be traced back to her!" His voice thundered like a hammer. My breath caught as if the accusation had been aimed directly at me. Lucas didn't defend me. He never did. For hours I replayed those words, struggling to comprehend. How could I possibly be responsible for a shipping delay in a project I had nothing to do with? Was I truly their scapegoat, the vessel for every disappointment? That night, I sought comfort where I always had. In the old shed behind the garden, dusty and half-forgotten, lay the dog bed where Rusty, our golden retriever, used to sleep. He'd been gone for years, but I found his worn collar in a box. I sat on the floor, clutching it in my hands, tears slipping down my cheeks. Rusty had been the only one who'd stayed by my side as a child, the only creature who made me feel seen. "I miss you," I whispered into the silence, pressing the collar against my chest. For a few precious minutes, I allowed myself to grieve, not just for Rusty, but for the family I never truly had. When I returned to my room, my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number glowed on the screen. "Clara, the truth isn't what you think. At the party, you'll see everything." My hands shook as I read it again. Who was this? How did they know me? And what truth were they talking about? I sank into my chair, heart pounding, mind racing. For the first time, I felt the edges of something larger, darker, waiting beyond the shadows of my family's perfect facade. And the party, the one I had been banned from, was no longer just a wound. It was a promise. The night of Richard's birthday arrived like a storm I wasn't prepared to weather. The Hayes mansion gleamed brighter than ever, strings of golden lights cascading across the marble pillars, a valet line curving down the driveway, the air buzzing with laughter and clinking glasses. I wasn't invited, but the message I'd received days earlier echoed in my mind. At the party, you'll see everything. My hands trembled as I pushed open the heavy double doors. The ballroom stretched endlessly, chandeliers dripping crystal above the crowd. Dozens of guests, politicians, investors, society's elite, milled around in designer gowns and tailored tuxedos. The moment my heels clicked against the marble floor, I felt hundreds of eyes turn toward me. Richard froze at the far end of the room, standing tall beside Vivian and Lucas, his face drained of color. "You shouldn't be here," he hissed, his voice cutting through the music though he hadn't raised it. My chest tightened. He didn't call me daughter. He didn't ask why. He simply tried to erase me with words. I turned, ready to retreat, when a man near the stage dropped his glass, the sound shattering into silence. Jonathan Ward, the most powerful investor in Richard's empire, stared at me as if he'd seen a ghost. "Clara Hayes?" His voice carried through the stunned crowd. I thought Richard had only one child, a son. The room froze, the air sucked dry. Whispers slithered between guests like snakes. Vivian clutched Lucas's arm. Richard's jaw clenched, his lips pressed thin. I stood rooted to the spot, my heart thundering. For the first time in years, I wasn't invisible. I was exposed. And the secret they had buried was clawing its way to the surface. The silence of that ballroom felt endless. Hours later, when the party dwindled into forced laughter and awkward departures, I slipped into Richard's private study. My fingers shook as I rifled through the mahogany drawers, searching for answers. Something inside me screamed that Jonathan's shock hadn't been a coincidence. At last, I found a thick folder bound with a leather strap. I opened it, breath hitching. Dozens of documents spilled out. Contracts, offshore accounts, shell corporations. My name appeared again and again, authorized by Clara Hayes, signed under Clara Hayes. I pressed a trembling hand to my mouth. He hadn't just erased me from his life. He had stolen me, used my identity to build entire companies I'd never heard of, to launder money I had never touched. I wasn't his daughter in his eyes. I was a shield, a false signature, a scapegoat on paper. I sank into the chair, tears blurring the words until they swam before me. I am not a person to him. I'm just a name. The weight of it crushed me. I thought of the photo albums without my face, the invitations without my name, the whispered instructions to stay away. He hadn't merely erased me from family life. He had written me into a lie that could destroy me if exposed. Sobbing, I stumbled upstairs, clutching the folder to my chest. In my room, I pulled out an old notebook and began writing a letter. "To Clara, age 25, I began, my pen trembling. "I'm sorry. I'm sorry no one loved you the way you deserved. I'm sorry you believed their lies when they told you you were the problem. You weren't. You were just never what they wanted. But you are real, and you matter." The tears spilled freely, smudging the ink. For once, I wasn't writing to prove myself to them. I was writing to comfort the girl inside me who had grown up believing she was invisible. When the words finally slowed, exhaustion settled over me. I folded the letter carefully, tucking it into the notebook. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. With shaking hands, I opened the message. "Your DNA results are ready. I clicked the link, my eyes scanning line after line until the truth punched the air from my lungs. Lucas wasn't Richard's biological son. He was adopted, hidden behind lies of legitimacy, and me, the one they tried to erase, was the only biological child Richard Hayes ever had. The room spun, my breath ragged. Everything I thought I knew had inverted in a single line of text. My whole life, I'd been treated as the outsider, the unwanted. But I was the heir, the true daughter, and suddenly I understood. Richard hadn't been trying to protect me. He'd been trying to protect himself. The morning after the party, the house was quieter than usual, but silence in the Hayes mansion was never peace. It was tension wrapped in velvet. I found Vivian in the sunroom, trimming roses with the careful hands of someone who had spent her life arranging appearances. She looked up as I entered, her smile polished, almost brittle. Why him? My voice cut sharper than I expected. Why Lucas? Why was he always chosen while I was erased? Vivian's hand stilled on the pruning shears. For a moment, I thought she would brush me off as she always did, with a laugh or a dismissive tilt of her head. But her shoulders sagged ever so slightly, and she whispered, "Because your father wanted it that way." "Why?" I demanded. My chest burned, every breath weighted with years of silence. "Tell me the truth." Her gaze drifted to the window. "Lucas isn't Richard's biological son. He adopted him long before you were born, but he built the world around that illusion. To Richard, Lucas was proof he was the perfect father, raising an heir, molding him in his image. You were the complication, the one thing he couldn't control." The words slammed into me. I gripped the edge of a chair to steady myself. All these years, all the rejection, the omissions, the whispers, it had never been about me being less. It had been about protecting Richard's performance. My fury rose like fire in my chest. So he erased me, to keep up appearances, to make his empire look untouchable. Vivian's lips parted as if to soothe, but I didn't give her the chance. "He can't hide anymore," I snapped. "I won't let him bury me with his lies." I stormed out, leaving her frozen among her roses. Hours later, my phone rang. A number I didn't recognize lit up the screen. I hesitated before answering. "Ms. Hayes," a deep voice said, steady and deliberate. "This is Jonathan Ward. I've suspected your father of misconduct for years, but last night confirmed it. He's been hiding something bigger than anyone knows. If you're ready, I can help you." My pulse pounded. "What do you want from me?" "Not what I want," he said. "What you deserve." "Justice." The line went dead, but the fire inside me roared brighter. I wasn't just a forgotten daughter anymore. I was the key to his downfall. That night, I spread everything across my bedroom floor, the fake contracts signed in my name, the offshore accounts, the DNA results proving Lucas wasn't his blood. Each piece of evidence glared back at me, sharp as glass. I took photos, scanned documents, built a timeline. Then I made an appointment with a lawyer. The young woman across the desk listened intently, her eyes widening as she sifted through the files. "If this is all legitimate," she said, "your father is guilty of fraud, identity misuse, and potentially money laundering, but exposing him won't be easy. He's powerful, and he'll fight." "I've been fighting my whole life," I said quietly. "I just didn't realize it until now." For the first time, I felt the ground steady beneath me. Still, even fire needs breath to burn. A week later, I found myself sitting in a dimly lit community center with a circle of strangers. It was a support group, children of toxic families, survivors of gaslighting and scapegoating. "My name is Clara," I began, my voice trembling, "and I've spent most of my life believing I was the problem. But I wasn't. I was just inconvenient to the people who were supposed to love me." The nods around the circle, the quiet murmurs of understanding, wrapped me in a warmth I hadn't felt in years. For once, I wasn't invisible. For once, my story mattered. When I left that night, my chest felt lighter. I wasn't healed, not yet, but I wasn't alone. Back at home, I placed the files into a locked briefcase. My plan was clear. At the next board meeting, I would bring everything into the light, but as I shut the case, a shadow shifted outside my door. The faint creak of a floorboard sent a chill up my spine. I opened the door suddenly, and Lucas stood there, eyes wide, caught in the act. "What were you doing?" I asked sharply. He stammered, I heard you talking on the phone, about Dad, about evidence." His gaze darted to the case, then back to me. "Clara, if you go through with this, you'll destroy everything." "Maybe it deserves to be destroyed," I shot back. His jaw tightened. For the first time, he looked torn. Not the golden boy, not the chosen heir, but a brother caught between loyalty and truth. "I don't know whose side I'm on anymore," he muttered and walked away. I stood frozen, my heart racing. If Lucas betrayed me, everything would unravel before it began. The boardroom was a cathedral of glass and steel, sunlight pouring through tall windows that once seemed to sanctify Richard Hayes's reign. Today, the light felt harsher, as if it were waiting to expose every crack in the empire he had built. Executives filled the long mahogany table, shuffling papers, murmuring greetings, eyes flicking toward Richard at the head of the table. He looked invincible as always, polished suit, commanding presence, but I carried the one thing he couldn't polish away: the truth. Jonathan Ward sat across from him, calm and silent, his gaze sliding toward me as I entered. My pulse thundered, but I forced my steps steady, briefcase tight in my grip. Richard frowned when he saw me. "This is a private meeting, Clara. You don't belong here." "I do," I said, my voice carrying farther than I expected. I set the briefcase on the table and snapped it open. "And so does the truth." The room hushed. I spread out the documents, contracts signed under my name, account transfers, offshore records. Gasps rippled down the table. One executive stammered, "Is this authentic?" "Yes," Jonathan said firmly, standing. "And I can confirm this is not the first time irregularities have surfaced. Richard has been using his daughter's identity to conceal fraudulent dealings." "Lies!" Richard roared, slamming his fist against the table. "This is slander! My own daughter!" "Am I your daughter?" My voice cracked, but I didn't waver. "Or am I just a signature you used when it suited you?" He turned to the others, his face red. "She's unstable. She doesn't know what she's saying." Before he could finish, Jonathan pressed a button on a small device. A recording filled the room. Richard's voice, unmistakable, barked from the speakers. "Use Clara's name. No one will question it. She's nothing but a ghost in this family anyway." The words cut through the boardroom like a blade. Executives shifted uncomfortably, whispers rising into a storm. Richard's face drained of color. "No," he muttered, shaking his head. "That's out of context." "Enough," Jonathan said, his voice final. "We've heard enough." The room erupted. Questions, accusations, shouts. Papers flew, chairs scraped. The empire Richard had built was cracking before his eyes. And then, in the chaos, Lucas stood. His hands trembled as he looked between Richard and me. "Son," Richard barked, desperate. "Tell them this is all lies." The silence stretched. Lucas's lips parted, his chest heaving. Finally, he said, "I choose Clara." The words landed like thunder. Richard staggered back as if struck. Gasps filled the room. For the first time, Lucas's loyalty wasn't his shield. It was mine. The meeting ended in disarray, executives storming out, Jonathan giving instructions, Richard screaming until his voice cracked. But the tide had turned, and nothing could drag it back. Hours later, outside the boardroom, reporters swarmed the lobby. Flashbulbs exploded as Jonathan addressed the press, confirming investigations into Richard's fraudulent practices. Vivian tried to leave discreetly, but whispers followed her like shadows. Her pearl necklace glistened under the harsh lights, but her dignity cracked with every camera flash. "Vivian Hayes," one reporter shouted. "How long have you known?" She faltered, her lips tightening, but didn't answer. The world that once envied her was now circling like vultures. Inside, Richard's empire collapsed further. Accounts frozen, contracts suspended, allies turning into enemies. And me? I walked out through the chaos with my head high. For once, I wasn't invisible. I wasn't erased. The air outside felt different, cooler, cleaner. I inhaled deeply, the weight on my chest lifting ever so slightly. The sound of my heels echoed against the pavement, a rhythm that was mine alone. But as I reached the edge of the crowd, Lucas caught up to me. His hand brushed my arm. His voice was barely a whisper. "Clara," he said, eyes glistening. "I always knew. I always knew you were his real child. I was too afraid to say it." I stared at him, the words sinking in like stones in water. For years, I thought Lucas had been blind to my pain, complicit in my erasure. But now I saw the truth. He hadn't been blind. He'd been a coward. He lowered his gaze. "I'm sorry." The noise of the press, the shouting, the chaos of the collapsing empire faded behind us. For that moment, it was just the two of us, siblings bound not by loyalty, but by secrets and silence. I stepped back, uncertain whether his confession was a beginning or an ending. The lawsuits came swiftly, like a tidal wave crashing against the fortress Richard Hayes had spent decades building. Federal investigators combed through his accounts, uncovering layer after layer of fraud and identity misuse. Properties were seized, assets frozen, headlines blared across every major outlet. Richard Hayes, the fallen titan of finance. For the first time, the city that once bowed to him now spat his name with disgust. Investors pulled away, allies vanished, and the man who once commanded boardrooms was left sitting in a courtroom, stripped of power, stripped of pride. I watched from a distance. I didn't need to be in the gallery to see justice unfold. It wasn't my voice screaming in triumph or my hand delivering the final blow. The truth was enough. The truth had always been enough. Some relatives who had once ignored me now reached out. An aunt called, her voice shaky. "Clara, I never knew. I'm sorry I didn't see what they did to you." A cousin wrote me a letter, apologizing for believing the glossy lie instead of the hidden pain. For years, I would have clung to those scraps of validation. Now, I simply received them, calm and steady. Their remorse didn't erase the past, but it confirmed what I had always known. I was never the problem. Justice didn't come in blood or fire. It came in paper trails and signatures, in the simple unveiling of facts too heavy to deny. And though Richard fought, red-faced and trembling, his voice grew smaller with every hearing, drowned by the weight of evidence. One morning, I opened the paper and nearly dropped my coffee. Splashed across the front page was my face, a photograph captured as I left the boardroom weeks earlier, chin raised, eyes forward. The headline read, "The daughter who brought down an empire." The words stole my breath. For a long time, I had been the daughter who ruined everything. Now, I was something else entirely. Still, glory wasn't what I sought. The name on the headline wasn't victory, it was closure. Months passed. I left the mansion behind, its gilded walls now suffocating with ghosts. I packed what little I owned and drove until the skyline changed, trading glass towers for the hum of a smaller city where no one knew my history. Here, I rented a small apartment with peeling paint and a view of the river. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I found work at a nonprofit dedicated to helping those from fractured families, children who had been silenced or erased the way I had. At first, I only volunteered. Then, as days turned into weeks, I began leading workshops, sharing my story quietly, not as a weapon, but as a hand extended to others lost in the same shadows. Slowly, I built what I had never been given. A chosen family, friends who listened without judgment, colleagues who valued my voice, survivors who called me sister, not out of blood, but out of shared wounds and resilience. One evening, after a long day, I stood on the balcony of my tiny apartment. The city lights glimmered like stars below, the river catching the last streaks of twilight. A breeze tugged at my hair, cool and gentle. For once, I wasn't haunted by the echoes of my father's voice, or the sting of Vivian's dismissals, or Lucas's silence. I closed my eyes and whispered into the night. Finally, I'm free. The words weren't a battle cry, they were a release, soft and steady, like air filling my lungs for the first time. Behind me lay ruin, scandal, and betrayal. Before me stretched something uncharted, undefined, but alive. I didn't know where this road would take me, but I knew it would be mine. The sun rose the next morning, flooding my balcony with gold, and as I stepped into the light, I realized the greatest revenge had never been destroying Richard Hayes. It was living a life that he could no longer touch. And so my story didn't end with an empire's collapse. It began with my rebirth.